Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 92 of Literacy in Color. The alphabet is something we use every single day, whether we're reading words on a page or a street sign, or writing a quick text or grocery list. It's completely ingrained in our day-to-day lives. But have you ever stopped to wonder where these squiggles actually came from? Today, I'm joined by brilliant linguist, Dr. Danny Bate, author of Why Q Needs You, a history of our letters and how we use them, as he takes us on a journey through time, from ancient Egypt to the Great Vowel Shift, unpacking the rich, fascinating history of our alphabet in a way that's both engaging and full of humor. If you've ever wanted to make better sense of our writing system, this episode is one you'll truly enjoy. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Danny Bate here today. I have to thank Miss Fiona Hamilton for bridging the connection. She has been a wonderful guest on her High Frequency Word Project book, as well as her projects with Engage with the Page and Search Engage. And clearly, if you have listened to those episodes, you know that both she and I are big fans of etymology and word history and all of the good fun that comes along with our beautiful layered English language. So Danny Bate is a linguist himself, a brilliant linguist who is the author of the book, Why Q Needs You. I just have to say before we get started, I have noticed that you live in Czech Republic, so I do want to say ahoy and dobry den because I am Polish and the language is very similar. So I know you're not Czech by birth, but living in that realm, I do love to bring some language connections in. So welcome to the show, Danny.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you also to Fiona, as you say, for bridging this connection. It just means the world that people think of me, bear me in mind, and suggest me for these things. And yes, ahoy to you, or cześć, I should say
cześć.
as well. Cześć, because the Czechs say ahoy. It's a landlocked country. It has no access to the sea, and yet they drink rum and speak like pirates. Yeah, that's home for me. So yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
How wonderful. So maybe you can briefly share about your background and And what led you down this road? How did you get into studying linguistics in the first place? I always say if I didn't go into education, knowing what I know now, I would love to be a linguist.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question to introduce me to your lovely listeners. But I do have to admit that the origins of my obsession with linguistics that has really directed the course of my entire adult life, the origins are a little bit murky. What I can say is that it did start as a teenager, and it started because of an extremely brilliant teacher. A teacher who inspired me at school and recognized something in me and then encouraged me to recognize that aspect of myself, which is that I really like language. I grew up in a completely monolingual environment in the south of the United Kingdom, surrounded by English and snippets of other languages as well. Not much of an awareness of the great wide world, but this teacher recognized that I got along with French in particular, that I liked the grammar, I liked the nuts and bolts. I was interested in the sort of nerdy stuff behind the scenes of the language, and he encouraged this in me. The school was really good in that more than one foreign language was offered, so I took French alongside German all the way through my GCSEs, which you take at age 16 in the UK, and then your A levels, which you take aged 17 to 18. And that was a great grounding in two foreign languages, and I think I was pretty confident that all of my interests had an intersection, and that intersection was called linguistics. I still wasn't entirely sure what it was. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith. I decided to study this in the UK for a bachelor's degree. Day one, lecture one, yep, this is for me. I have made the right choice. So BA, MPhil, PhD in linguistics ever since. Yep, it was the right choice for me.
I love that. I love that. And I feel like once you start studying language and add another language to your belt, you start to see connections, even between Czech and Polish. Seeing some kind of connections there is fascinating. But I grew up in a household. I'm 100% Polish, so I grew up speaking Polish and English simultaneously, and then Spanish in middle school and high school. Then I took Portuguese in college. Then I took some Latin. I saw that you even took some biblical Greek. I studied classics and religious studies in my undergrad, and so I had some familiarity with that as well. And I think once you dive into more than one language, it just becomes this rabbit hole of connections and how interconnected many of the systems actually are. So I think your work is so particularly fascinating, and you have such a delightful way of making it joyful. And even within your book, there are so many punny jokes along the way. I have to say, this is truly your gift in making this kind of information something that's enjoyable and not just dry history. So what inspired you to write Why Q Needs You in the first place?
I mean, this is all very kind. Thank you very much, Michelle. I really appreciate it. And it's so important to me that the humor of what I write is recognized, because you don't have to know this stuff. You don't have to know about linguistics and languages. And yes, I can make a case for how useful it can be in certain contexts and for certain people, but you don't have to learn it. So partly, I can't just grab people and say, you must know this stuff. I have to meet them at their front door. And I do that through humor and through making jokes and just wearing my knowledge lightly so that it can very easily become someone else's knowledge. I can share it along. And there are many different media through which you can do this kind of public linguistics, sharing the field with the general public. I like podcasting. I love recording things. I love giving talks and speaking to people. But above all, it's about writing for me. I love writing. It comes most naturally to me. I write even, frankly, when I shouldn't be writing, when I should be doing something else. I spent all of yesterday avoiding my taxes and writing about Hebrew instead. It just comes very naturally to me. I will get around to the taxes, I promise. But it was a big goal to me to write an accessible book, a book that has a publisher behind it, so it has a good distribution. But what to do? Because my kind of academic background is actually in syntax, in the field of word order and assembling words into sentences. That's what my PhD thesis is in. It's hard to make very, for want of a better word, sexy as a topic. I love it. I think it's great. And I think I can just about make it accessible and interesting to a broad audience, but there's a little bit more legwork to be done. So for me, it had to be another topic. It had to be something that could really grab people. And what better, I think, than the alphabet and spelling, which most of us, unlike speech and all the components of our spoken language, most of us can remember learning the alphabet. We're old enough, our memory is engaged by that point in time. We remember being at school. But once you've learned it, we're actually so good at the alphabet and spelling that then we can spend the rest of our lives not really thinking about it. So a book that could reintroduce people to the alphabet, to the systems of spelling, and present the stuff that you don't know, so that's the ancient history of the alphabet, with stuff that you unconsciously do know, which is all the fantastic rules behind English spelling, because there are rules, I promise. That was very important to me, and that just seemed like a winner. So from that kind of drive to write a book about linguistics, Why Q Needs You was born.
Yeah. And so essentially, you dive through every single letter of the alphabet and you share about its rich history and how it came to be what it is. And like you mentioned, the rules that are governing our alphabetic writing system, particularly in English, but seeing the letters transformation through time and how it was used by different people and how even the shape of it or the sounds that it represented have shifted throughout history with your humor. I mean, I purchased the hard copy of the book. It hasn't arrived just yet, so I listened to the audiobook. And I also adore that you are the reader of the audiobook, but the humor, I'm telling you, I was laughing out loud many times. My husband's like, "What are you laughing at?" I'm like, "The alphabet." So perhaps you can take a moment just to share how the book is organized and what listeners would anticipate finding inside if they grab a copy.
Well, it's organized, I think, alphabetically, which is very sensible. Every letter gets its own chapter. So rather than chapter 1, 2, 3, it progresses chapter A, B, C, right through to chapter Z, or Z, if you prefer. I do talk about that difference as well. I think that was a perfect excuse to talk about the complicated face of modern English. And these 26 chapters, one for each letter, bookended. So we're between an introduction and an epilogue in which I try to sum up a lot of the very complicated, very big themes that emerge when we consider the alphabet. This, on the one hand, is just a lovely aspect of the book. It's, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but it's something unique and distinctive about the way that it progresses. And it's very important to me that the reader has an enjoyable experience where you think, okay, the chapters are manageable. They each start with a little bit of what I call the epigraph. It's a funny phrase or quote relating to the letter itself, just to get the reader on side. That really matters to me, that the reader should never feel daunted by a particular chapter. But there is also a kind of secondary motivation, which to this day spooks me a little bit, in that I have to, at the beginning of the book, really tell the bare bones story of the alphabet before returning to certain aspects in more detail in later chapters. That's a very reasonable thing to do, but how to structure it, how to do it, structure it around the letters. But it was spooky how, after taking, just as a starting point, the first 5 letters, A, B, C, D, E, as the chapters which I'm going to tell this skeletal story in, these letters, by accident, perfectly suit that historical narrative in a really quite spooky way, in that beginning with A is, by accident, the perfect letter to tell the absolute origins of the alphabet, the really kind of day one, the first few centuries when the alphabet is getting up and running. B happens to be ideal for then introducing the next in this cast of characters that have contributed to the alphabet, which is the ancient Greeks. C is brilliant for talking about the role of the ancient peoples of Italy, not only the Romans, but also the Etruscans, who I love spending time with. And the Etruscans, these people that I'm happy to talk more about, one of their contributions to the alphabet that we still use is the letter C. And on and on it goes. And it was almost spooky that I could, no, I'm not going to say it was almost spooky. It was spooky. It was a bit weird that the alphabet so perfectly suited this narrative structure. And then after chapter E, I could explore other topics or return to certain topics in a little bit more depth.
Look at that historical timeline. The synchronicities sometimes are just amazing. Maybe we can start with that origin story of the alphabet. So, in a brief history, can you explain how the invention of the alphabetic writing system even came to be? And perhaps we can even dive into that letter A. Originally, it represented an ox, right?
Mm-hmm. It did indeed. Yes, it represented an ox's head. And if you think, well, that sounds a bit strange, I can't really see the resemblance, I will happily unpack that for you. But before I do that, I do have to put my academic or my historian's hat on and say that so much of the earliest history of the alphabet is debated. We are working with fragments, literal fragments sometimes, bits of objects that people have dug up from the past And we have to try and assemble a coherent story from these pieces of early alphabetic writing. And here's what I think we can say with a reasonable degree of certainty, which is that the alphabet emerges within ancient Egypt, within the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, maybe around the year 1900 BC to 1800 BC. So Egypt is doing extremely well in this time. And if you think, well, does that mean that we get our writing system from hieroglyphs? Yes, but kind of no at the same time. Hieroglyphs are definitely the writing system of the Egyptians at this time, and they're doing really well. They work super well for the Egyptian language. But in their shadow, a new system is born, a system that takes hieroglyphs, the symbols, as its starting point, but radically repurposes them. It assigns them to new functions for a different language. Really, I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but the alphabet as we know it, this single tradition of writing that has sounds at its core, is due to immigration, is due to a population of non-Egyptians within ancient Egypt. People speaking a Semitic language, so that's a language belonging to a family that today include Hebrew and Arabic. And these people are clearly really well integrated into ancient Egypt, but they want their own writing system for their language, which is different. So they take hieroglyphs, and rather than use them for all sorts of very complicated and sophisticated ways, there's a very simple principle at the heart of the new system. It's one symbol on the page or inscribed into a piece of rock or whatever it happens to be for one sound of their language. And the way they do this is through something called the acrophonic principle. Two-word term, piece of technical terminology. I do not shy away from technical terminology in the book. It's on me, the writer, to explain it to you successfully. And what this principle basically says is that you have a hieroglyph. It looks like a thing. It looks like a body part or an animal or an object in the world. And the word for that thing in their Semitic language starts with a particular sound. Could be anything, could be any kind of consonant that they have. And now the first consonant of that spoken word is what that symbol now stands for. So that's all quite abstract. I'll give you an example. In their ancient language, an alp is a word for an ox or a cow. And they take the symbol of an ox's head, so that's horns and a little mouth and an eye and everything. And because their word for ox is alp and starts with a glottal stop, so in your throat, now the symbol stands for a glottal stop, one symbol for one sound. As soon as you do that, as soon as they have this set of symbols for the limited number of sounds in their language, our alphabet is up and running. Obviously, it's got so far to go. It's got so many changes to undergo in the way that it's used, the languages it's used for, the way that the letters look, the way that they're oriented on the page. But the alphabet is up and running. And this is why A is just so perfect for starting a book about this, because there is a little bit of that old ox in our capital letter A. Remember that the capital letters are older than the lowercase letters. If you take a capital letter A, it has two legs. Well, they were the horns of the ox. And it has its point. That was the mouth. It's been rotated over the centuries or over the millennia. What is it? 4,000 years now. But there's a little bit of the original symbol behind our capital letter A. And that's the absolute basics. That's the birth of the alphabet. Just that single principle and sort of a new tree of writing sprouting in the shade of hieroglyphics.
So fascinating. That's so interesting. It's really cool to think about the transition from hieroglyphs to the writing system as we know it, because oftentimes we don't view our Roman alphabet as these pictograms, but at one point they kind of were, right? And
Exactly.
they've evolved to have a little less detail, but at their origin, they did have a representation of something.
Exactly so. Yeah. Almost all of the letters do have some sort of pictographic origin where they look like a thing in the world. Some don't because they are later inventions. They've joined the alphabet at a later date, but there is a core set of letters, and the majority of them, actually, the majority of the English alphabet still, that have this pictographic origin. And they've lost their, say sophistication, that's not the right word. They've lost their complexity as symbols. They don't look like things anymore because that's more efficient. Let's say you're writing a shopping list and you need to ask for, I don't know, something starting with A, apple. There you go. If you had to scribble down a shopping list and for the A of apple, you needed to draw a full cow's head, that would take far too long. So there's been a reduction in the complexity of the symbols to allow them to be written more quickly. And that's great. That's efficiency. And that's a general principle behind why the letters now look the way they do.
Yeah. And then initially you said letter A was a glottal stop sound. And if anyone knows anything about linguistics, we know that our vowels are our open mouth, continuous sounds, right? So initially letter A wasn't even technically a vowel if it had that restriction of airflow, right?
That's right. Yes, this is the funny thing. The original alphabet, the system as it's created, is only for consonant sounds. As you so nicely say, these are the sounds that some way restrict the airflow. They stop it or they modify it in some audible way. So that's fine. That works really well for certain spoken languages. The Semitic languages of today, so things like Arabic and Hebrew, still fundamentally have this system. They do have symbols. They do have either dual purpose letters or little marks that you can add to indicate vowels. But fundamentally, they're all about consonants still, because that's fine. That's what the spoken language needs. Vowels really enter the alphabet when this system has been passed around the Mediterranean in a kind of anti-clockwise way, and it lands in the hands of the Greeks. The Greeks don't have a Semitic language. It's completely unrelated. So consequently, the structure of its words, the way that their words mean things, means that vowels are much more important. Really, to write down the Greek language and have it read successfully by other Greeks, you need to be able to write down vowels as well. So off the top of my head, you could have a word like genos in Greek, which means a type of something, and genus, which means a jaw. And if you can't write down the o and u sounds, your reader won't be able to read the difference between these two words. So the Greeks need vowels, and consequently, they add them to the alphabet. That either they create new letters from scratch, or they repurpose letters from the original Semitic system, and A is one of them. So the alp becomes the alpa in early Greek pronunciation, alpha in modern Greek pronunciation, which is, of course, still the name for the letter in Greek today and is the start of the word alphabet. So you already know the ancient Semitic word for an ox. It's there still in alphabet.
Yeah. Alpha, beta is AB, ox house.
It's ox house. Exactly. Our system is the ox house.
I love it. So fascinating. And you so eloquently already shared this acrophonic principle and what that exactly means. And so essentially, the origin of our alphabet, we had this one letter to one sound match. And I can't recall if it was from a podcast episode I listened of you or if it was in your book, but you even gave an example of emojis and say you wanted to spell the word Danny. You can start with, I don't know, a dog and an apple and that kind of thing. So it was kind of this, whatever the thing was, it had that first sound representation. So it's fair to say at one point in our history, we did have this one letter, one sound match. And over time, there became a sophistication to our spelling system because now in English spelling, sometimes we have 3 letters working together to represent one sound or 2 letters working together to represent a sound. So those kinds of things have evolved as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's natural. That's just normal when it comes to speech. I've done my best in the book to describe this maybe counterintuitive phenomenon, but writing and speech are fundamentally separate things. We are so literate today that we really think of them as one and the same. We wrap them up in our terminology. We say things like, that guy doesn't pronounce his H's. Well, yeah, what you mean is you don't pronounce the sound that H stands for, or I don't know, in the UK you can drop your G's in certain accents and in certain words. You're not actually dropping your G from the spelling, you're dropping the sound that we associate with that letter. And this is basically when you have this fundamental distinction between the two, a lag can develop, a sort of minor differences can build up. And so the representation of sound in writing can be strained a little bit because speech changes. Speech constantly changes in a way down the generations. It's inaudible. We don't really notice it as it's happening, but it does change in a way that it doesn't come naturally to writing. And you can have this lag. And really, whenever you set sounds as the basis for your writing system, you're sort of pressing play on a ticking clock until your writing system becomes completely out of date.
Yeah, and it kind of brings together all of the dialectical differences that we have throughout all of the different Englishes. Perhaps I have a cup of herbal tea, and maybe you have a cup of herbal tea.
Hmm.
And yet the spelling will remain intact even when pronunciation can shift. So originally, when we think about our alphabet, it was designed to represent those sounds fairly efficiently. But when we look at English today, we don't always have that one letter to one sound match. So, how did we end up with such a complex system? Where did this shift begin to happen
It,
historically?
it's a really big question, and I think a way to appreciate this question or get stuck into it is that by looking at older forms of the English language, so older stages of English that we have evidence for, or written evidence, we don't see these problems. If you go back to sort of pre 1100s to the period that we call Old English, which is essentially a foreign language for today, it really has changed in so many ways. One of the nice things or good things for learners about Old English is that the writing system is pretty good. It works well for the language. There's a decent ratio of one sound to one symbol. So something's happened since that point. And I really identified two big themes, two sets of factors that I can't collapse into one, that I see as two themes that have gone into the modern state of English spelling. And one of them alone would be enough to make the spelling look really weird and not work particularly well. But two, goodness, I mean, it's created a bit of a mess. I'm a defender of English spelling, but I will admit it's a bit creaky as a machine. These two themes are, they're very similar in my wording of them, the distinct history of English speech and the distinct history of English speakers. And as I say, one of these would be enough to make the writing system, make the alphabet a little bit clunky. But two is, we're in dangerous territory. The first one refers to the point I've already mentioned, that speech changes. And English has undergone some distinct, unique changes in speech down the generation that really strain the relationship between written symbols and pronunciation. Some of these changes apply to all the accents of English. Some only apply to a subset. So there are changes that have happened in North American English that haven't happened in British English. For example, something like a short O in American English is now a kind of R vowel, as in part or coffee, whereas for me, that's still a rounded O vowel, so pot, coffee. We still understand each other, of course, but these things make up the accents. Then there are the big changes that apply to all the accents, probably because they took place before English becomes this global language and a multinational language. Like, we can name some famous examples, but there's a few of these as well. But I'll just briefly touch on the second theme, which is this distinct history of English speakers. And this is, again, unique to the language. You've got things like the Norman Conquest of 1066, where an army of Normans comes in, conquers England, and in a short space of time upsets the political landscape. They upset the linguistic landscape, so that now the top people in society aren't speaking Old English, they're speaking Old Norman, which is like French. That's huge. That's absolutely huge for how the language is going to be spelt, how it's going to sound. Later on, we've got things like the invention of the printing press, where foreign influences are coming in from the continent. We've got classical influences where people are making words look more like Latin and Greek, even though they don't sound like it. So famously, things like, I don't know, the B in doubt and debt, it was put back in there because it comes from Latin, and people in the Renaissance and humanistic periods really like Latin. So that's another factor. And the big one, I would say, is that we've never really had a single organization that can very undemocratically say, this is how it's going to be. We're going to sort spelling out. We're going to tidy up all of these things. We've never really had that. Other languages have. Things like l'Académie Française in France, for example. The Czech Republic, where I am, has its own faculty for the Czech language. We've never really had that. And the last chances, I think, are maybe in the 18th century, where we've got influential people, but they're not influential enough, and they're not ambitious enough to really reform spelling. So that doesn't happen. And then, as I say, English becomes global. And now all the English speaking countries are in a kind of standoff with each other. Nobody wants to be the first one to reform spelling and become a laughingstock. So we're stuck. We're stuck in this strange position for the time being with our clunky spelling. So huge factors, lots of things that I could definitely go into, but those are the two big themes behind our spelling today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may not take all of the conquest, the wars, the commerce, the cultural influence into consideration when they just view English as crazy. But it has gone through so many influences that have shaped what we have today. And I love that example that you gave with the be in doubt, just to Latinize the language. We want to look fancier. We want to be Latin. We don't want to just be English. And same thing with that French influence. It's like wanting to look more sophisticated and have more sophisticated words. And that's precisely why we also have multiple words for the same kind of construct. Like we'll have teacher and professor. And essentially, it means the same thing, but they have different word origins, and that all comes into play. And when we think about even that letter sound matchup again, going back to that acrophonic principle, oftentimes the sounds of our letters are embedded clues within our alphabet. You know, when we have the letter B, it starts with a B sound, and we have a letter M, it ends with a sound, and we have those cues. So just briefly, this popped in my head. What happened with letter H? How come that's such an outlier?
Yes, that's a great question. Because we learn the letters so early on in life and we learn them in a lovely, catchy song, their names seem immortal, eternal, but they're not. They've undergone several changes. One of the big changes is when the alphabet jumps from Greece, ancient Greece, to Italy, the letters get renamed. So alpha just becomes R for probably the Romans, maybe the Etruscans before them as well. It's not really certain who renamed these letters. And H is an outlier, and that is to do with sound change. Once again, that's a really common sound change that happens over and over again, is that the P sound, the breathy glottal sound for which H stands in English on its own, can be dropped from certain languages. So it happens in modern English, especially in British English. It's quite typical of London. If you've ever heard or watched something like My Fair Lady, you have hurricanes hardly ever happen. It's a distinctive London feature, but it's super common, not just in London. So that's happened in the UK. It's also happened in ancient Greece, where one particular dialect of ancient Greek dropped its H sound, and it happened in late classical Latin. So this is the sort of waning years of the Western Roman Empire, round about maybe the year 200, 300, 400 AD. And this is naturally going to affect the letter H, which previously is very sensibly called ha. It's called ha, as in ha ha ha. But when you drop the h sound from speech, that will make the letter H sound like ah, and that won't do because that's the name of the first letter. That's the name of A for the Romans. So something's got to give. That much is clear. What also seems to be clear is that the Romans renamed it. They renamed the letter to make it obvious which letter they're talking about. And H becomes something like akka, akka for the Romans. Where they got this name from is not particularly clear. It may have been that it was something like aha, and we can't tell that from the spelling, but it was their attempt, their name that would allow them to produce something like an H sound. But it became akka. It still is akka in Italian today, but the name catches on to the north of Italy, and in what becomes France, the name becomes accia, and this in modern French is ash. But English, which often preserves many sounds that French itself has changed, they take accia and it becomes H in modern day English. So it's all to do with the throat of the Romans losing the sound once long ago, as it keeps happening over and over again.
I know. We'll see when the robots listen to this episode 300 years from now how our sounds have shifted in the future as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I find particularly interesting was your telling of the Great Vowel Shift. So I just have to say, chapter E was my tippy top favorite of all the chapters. It was a heftier one, but a lot of rich history in that chapter. Now we have these combinations. Letter E is such a sophisticated vowel in English, even when we consider all of the long vowels. We have EE, we have EA, we have different combinations spelling E. So can you speak to that period of time called the Great Vowel Shift and how even those combinations of EE and EA, how at one point they were actually distinguishable from each other, whereas today they sound one and the same?
Yes, I love that. I'm so pleased that you mentioned that because if it ever crosses people's minds and they wonder, well, these letters or these sounds are spelt with different letters or they're spelt in different ways, Doesn't that mean that they should have different sounds? They probably did 9 times out of 10, but speech keeps changing. And E is a great example of this because we have something like, I don't know, meet and meet in English. So meet the activity of meeting someone and meet the food. And these have different spellings, and they were once pronounced differently. We can tell that not only because of the spelling, but because of poetry. Poetry is so important for gaining a window into how people are speaking in the past because they're constructing poetry according to things like rhymes. And Shakespeare basically never rhymes words like meet and week, the 7 days, and weak, the adjective, the opposite of strong. He never rhymes these words. So for him, they are different in pronunciation. And Shakespeare is living through a big period of change, a really significant period of change for spoken English that we call the Great Vowel Shift. And I'm so pleased that you did enjoy Chapter E. I completely agree. It is hefty. It's ambitious as a chapter. It's sort of a potted history of English, but I just didn't know how else to share this information because the Great Vowel Shift just so totally deserves to be better known among speakers of English, native speakers, but also learners of English. It explains so much of the way that the language sounds. In that, if we wind back the clock to what we call Middle English, so medieval English, up to, let's say, the year, I don't know, 1450, the vowels of the language are pretty straightforward, in that you have a vowel produced with your mouth and the tongue. And this vowel can come in two forms. It can be long or short. You can have like an U and an U. You can have an I and an E, which is pretty typical. Polish has this, Czech has this, German has this as well. So there's a pretty distinct way of getting the most out of your vowels by just making a difference in how long you pronounce them for. But then comes along the Great Vowel Shift. And the Great Vowel Shift shifts all of the long vowels. It changes their tongue position in the mouth in a kind of chain reaction. So ones produced with a low tongue come to be produced with a middle low tongue. Ones produced with middle low tongue become middle high becomes very high, roof of the mouth. And the ones who are already in the roof of the mouth become diphthongs. They become like I and ow. So E becomes I and U becomes ow. And that's the nuts and bolts of the Great Vowel Shift. It does not happen overnight. Nobody just woke up in the morning and thought, you know what, I'm going to pronounce all my vowels differently. It happened very slowly. Probably because we are always trying to make our words distinct. If we're merging sounds, if we're not pronouncing vowels differently between words, we're going to confuse our listeners. We're going to have people say, sorry, did you just say mice or mouse? People are going to say, what? Speak properly, right? So we're always trying to keep the vowels separate in our mouths. And this sort of spatializing of the vowels within the mouth is probably what triggers and causes the Great Vowel Shift. The most important thing for the alphabet, for our conversation today, is that the Great Vowel Shift basically happens to English after a kind of standard spelling has emerged. So our standard spelling is unaffected. We don't have separate vowel letters for the unshifted short vowels and the shifted long vowels. We use the Middle English state of affairs. So you can see this with a word like child. Child has a shifted I vowel. It was long. And this contrasts with plural children, which has a short, unshifted vowel. Once upon a time, it would have been one child and two children. So very, very close, much closer in pronunciation. But the long vowel has been shifted. It's drifted off into an I sound, and yet the letter remains the same. The letter remains medieval. And this is a problem. And English has had to deal with this. This instantly doubles or triples the number of vowel sounds that a particular letter can stand for. And that complicates the situation massively. And we're dealing with the effects ever since. We don't have separate letters for the shifted sounds. We have to use things like magic E, for example, which turns a bit, unshifted, short vowel, into a bite, shifted, long vowel, right? Or something like pop becomes pope, fat becomes fate. We're using magic E as best we can as our go-to strategy for indicating these long vowels, where previously context would have been enough. We wouldn't have needed a separate system because the vowels are they're similar enough to guess what the word is when you're hearing it. And it's one of the major factors. And I'll just finish with this one point, which I absolutely love. For people who are going from English to other languages, if you're learning other, say, European languages, which use the same letters, the Great Vowel Shift is this huge fault line between the way that our words in English sound and the way that other words might sound. So we might have a word like information in English, information, that's one of the long vowels shifted. In Czech, informace, probably in Polish, informacja, something like that,
Hmm.
right? Not only the words themselves, but the alphabet itself, the names of the letters have all been shifted by the Great Vowel Shift. And if you undo it, you get something that sounds like the Polish or Czech alphabet. So A, B, C, undo the Great Vowel Shift, A, B, C, D, which I'm
Hmm.
guessing that's, I don't speak Polish, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it. Basically,
yeah.
it's Czech, it's German. So it's this huge dividing line that is, well, it just deserves to be better known because it makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it helps people make sense of why we have the spellings that we do. And there are so many angry people on social media who say, why is this spelled this way? People are always poking fun at English spelling. And yet, if we did have some type of spelling reform, I don't even know how it would be possible, but
Hmm.
but we consider words that even are homophones today, and spelling words the way that they are help make sense of the system when you look at related words. And for example, since we were talking about E and EA, you have words like heal and heal, as in to cure, or the heel of your foot. And if we spelt them the same way, we wouldn't have that related word of healthy, where the EA is now suddenly flexing to a short vowel sound. And we know that EA can say E, it can say and it also can say A in some words like steak, yet EE can only say E. So if we were to spell it EE, we wouldn't have that connection to words in the family, which trigger the meaning relationship. And oftentimes, even when the spellings seem obscure or they're not matching the sound precisely, it's because we have that meaning connection, or even deeper an etymological connection, like you shared with the B in doubt.
Hmm.
But I don't know. What are your thoughts on a spelling reform? Do you think that it can ever happen?
It's the $1 million question in that it would probably need $1 million to make it
Yeah.
happen. What do I think about reform? I mean, it is one of these really big questions that you don't have to write a book about the alphabet to appreciate, but it does help. I would say that it did clarify my own thoughts about reform, and it has made me the experience into a little bit of a defender and maybe an anti-reformist.
Yeah.
Maybe I wouldn't go that far. There are definitely things that we could tidy up, things that we should be open to change. We should be open to making small improvements and not instantly criticizing people and just saying, oh, that's wrong. So many spelling mistakes are actually kind of organic mini reforms. If a child writes ghost, for example, without the H, I would say that's an improvement. That's good. That's maybe not something to be instantly dismissed, but the whole scale reform, wow, this is a really, really big topic because you essentially need to, as I see it, satisfy two really big questions, satisfactorily answer two big questions, which are, who are you to attempt this reform? That's not like arrogance or anything, but do you have the means? Do you have the influence? Do you have the reach? A reason why this has not really happened in the history or the modern history of English is because we've not had people or institutions who've wielded enough respect. This is big. It would now need to be some sort of supranational organization that could gather together all the English speaking countries and say, let's work on this together. Now, that instantly sounds pretty unlikely, but then you have to answer satisfactorily the second question, which is who's English? Whose English is going to be the basis for this? And there are many valid answers, but I don't think there's one most valid answer. A valid one would be to say, well, it should be American English. It's the biggest, it's the most influential in the world today. But if you do that, then the other kinds of English may get a little annoyed. They may be annoyed that we have to drop the H from herbal, or we have to keep all the R's that you pronounce in American English, except in Boston, in a word like, car and heart and things like that, which American English would have a good reason for keeping in. So you really have to come up with good answers to these two questions. And I can't see that happening until some sort of big societal shift that knocks the English language off its perch, off its really prestigious position as one of the world's lingua francas today, or linguae francae, whatever the plural is, I don't know. But it's here for the time being. I would say that about standard English. And We learn it, we manage it. It is okay as a system. I love that you make the connection and you mention things like heal and healthy because with reform, yes, it would get our spelling more in line with our sounds, but we would lose a lot. We would throw a lot of babies out with the bathwater. No babies were harmed in the making of this reform, but nonetheless, we would lose a lot and we would lose a lot of morphological connections a lot of times. So I love the example of heal and healthy. Another one that comes to mind is to know something, which in English has, in modern English, has a silent K. It didn't used to, for what it would have been pronounced once upon a time. And we can tell this from poetry again. But know, so those four letters, K-N-O-W, firstly, that keeps it distinct from now when we're reading. We can just say, aha, we're talking about knowing things. We're not talking about right now. But also, it's a link, a morphological link, as a unit of meaning, a recognizable chunk of meaning. It can also be found in knowledge, where it has a different pronunciation. It's an O in my English. I guess in American English it would be knowledge, right? Then this is then connected to acknowledge, where arguably the K is not silent. Acknowledge is a related word. It's part of this word family. So if we were to spell all of these words according to their sounds, strictly their sounds, the morphological bit, the meaning of knowledge and knowing, would be lost. So, it's a conundrum. It's a big conundrum. And all I can do is just make your lovely listeners aware of these competing factors. And together, someday, we will have an answer to reform or not to reform. That is the question.
No, it's not the question. I'm a defender too.
Okay, excellent. Good.
I think that's what makes English spelling actually so beautiful, because you have this interconnected system of phonology with morphology and etymology. And when you put all of the pieces together, it finally makes sense. We can't just view it through one lens. But going back to that phonology piece, we know that sometimes there are multiple ways to represent a single sound. And the perfect example is that sound. We have C, we have K, we have CK. CK is an orthographic convention. We have that after a short vowel. So how did we end up, when we think about the history of the alphabet, how did we end up with both of these letters? And did word origin perhaps influence our spelling distinctions of when to use which letter in which appropriate time?
It absolutely did. Yes, etymology is key to understanding this. I would start this story of these two letters really back in ancient Italy, in the hands of the Romans. The Romans are establishing themselves in the last few centuries BC, and they're not only taking hold of Italy, they're also taking hold of the ancient alphabet, which is already about 1,000 years old by this point in time. And the Romans don't like redundancy, and they've inherited from the Greeks via the Etruscans these letters C and K, which by this point in time actually stand for the same sound. So you have K, K from the Greeks, that's kappa, and C, which was originally gamma, but it changes from a G to a K via the Etruscans because of their language. And the Romans don't like this redundancy, so they actually get rid of the letter K. Despite being the old hand, the one that's been spelling the K sound for centuries by this point, this is actually expelled from the alphabet. And consequently, descendants of Latin, descendants of the Romans language, like French, Italian, Romanian, Portuguese, Catalan, and Spanish, the big one, shouldn't forget Spanish, they tend not to use K. They continue this tradition of spelling everything with C because they can, because it works. Consequently, as well, words that we get from those languages, more or less, they're not going to include K. There may be a couple of exceptions because of English spelling and English spellers, but normally they don't include K. K, it becomes needed actually because of the Vikings, of all people. It's in the word, it's in Viking itself. If you followed the Romans and you spelt it with a C, then soft C would come into power and it would be the Vikings, which doesn't seem as threatening, in my opinion at least. So what happens is that, to begin with, Old English makes do with just C. It follows the Romans in this practice. They're clearly aware of the letter K because it's occasionally mentioned in their manuscripts and in their documents, but they don't need it. Old English can do with just C, as French does today, Italian does today, etc. It works really well. It's either a K or a Ch. That's fine. But the Vikings come on. They not only take lots of stuff from early medieval England, they also leave plenty of words behind. And these words that have not undergone certain shifts that English has and consequently are full of k sounds, mean that now English really needs the letter K, Middle English in particular, that's full of all these words that we get from Old Norse and also Norman. And the Normans are Northmen, they're descendants of the Vikings as well. So it's all connected in a sort of North sphere. Basically, Middle English has words where really by this point we need K because we've got K appearing before vowels that would lead us to pronounce it as a soft C. So we've got K in a word like kit and sky and, I don't know, keg and things like that. If we only had C, these would be something like Isai and Sig and Seg, and that's not good. So K is brought back and it really, really takes off in Middle English and continues to be useful. But when you have two letters that are useful, they're needed in English, absolutely, but they are fundamentally performing a dual function, or they're sharing a function, which is the sound k. There's going to be a lot of confusion. They're going to be a little bit mixed as well. And it's one of these mishmashes, the way in which really we could streamline the whole process is the CK. So in things like back and lick and attack and things like that. This is probably a practice that we actually get from the Dutch. This is a Dutch connection that's been brought in, along with the GH in ghost and aghast. These are things that we maybe get from the Dutch people that are helping English people to set up the printing press in the 15th century. And it's useful. It works. It works. That it's, as is so often the case, we use the combination of letters to signal a short vowel. We know that back is not bake, that it's there's two letters CK, but it could be tidied up. We could actually spell it with just C, as we do in a Greek word like music, right? Or something like that. So we could lose the K, or we could lose the C and spell back BAC. Both would work. Both are completely in line with established English spelling principles. But from the Dutch, we have this external influence and we have CK. So that's, I'd say in a nutshell, be a pretty large nut, but that's the complicated history of C and K and why we have them both in English.
So interesting. So essentially, K was booted out of the alphabet at one point and came back. And it's interesting to think about when students are learning some of our consonant blend sounds of that sk in the beginning of words, how sometimes it's a SC like in scooter, and sometimes it's an SK like in sky. And the difference is that word origin. So that SK would be Norse, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then SCH, like school, is Greek. So there we go. We have all of our sounds, but it's because of the influence. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a word like ghost and knowledge before. So why does English have so many silent letters? So-called silent, right?
So-called silent. Yes, absolutely. That you really do have to draw a distinction. You have to make a distinction between letters that are silent in that they really are not, they don't correspond to any sound, and letters that are silent if we think of them as like we can't really pair them up with a single discrete sound, but they are nonetheless working together with other letters to spell something. So I'll give a couple examples. In the first camp, I would put a word like knee, right? So the silent K, or the W in right. This really does not correspond to anything. Both would have been pronounced once upon a time, but they're not in basically any dialect of English. I mean, you have Scots in Scotland, but that's a separate language, really. It's like a sister language of English. Most accents of what we call English don't pronounce these letters, and I think we can safely say these are silent. They have their uses, as we've discussed before, with words like acknowledge and with reading comprehensibility, where we are scanning the page and these silent letters can actually guide us to the correct meaning very quickly. They can reduce ambiguity, at least in writing. But in the second group, we actually have things like GH, which so often is really contributing something. If you take night, as in nighttime, if you take out the GH, well, something changes. It becomes knit. So, take out the GH from light, it becomes lit. And those are different words, or they're different forms of the same word. So it's doing something. And what it's doing is it's working as maybe a trigraph with the I to make it clear that we're talking about the I vowel, the I diphthong. And the reason why that is the case is because it's the GH used to stand for a sound. That sound disappeared through the natural process of sound change. The sound would have been something like a h or a ch sound. as it is in like German Licht or Nacht. So there's another connection to related languages. And this sound drops out in early modern English. But by dropping out, we kind of want our word's fundamental structure to stay the same. This gives a little bit of room for the vowel, the I in Licht and Nicht, to grow. So it becomes Lied and Neat. And then this makes it pray for the Great Vowel Shift swoops in and makes this Lied in Neat into light and night. So they are working together in a sort of weird parallel development. The letters haven't changed, but they are nonetheless all needed because they've all contributed to the new sound of this letter. So to answer your question, it's sound change. Really, it's sound change at the heart of it. We do have some examples where the sound has never changed or is never pronounced, like the B and det and doubt and the L in salmon. That's another kind of classicizing invention. But the majority of silent letters were once pronounced and now they're not. And that's speech. It marches on.
Yeah, yeah. And those letters in particularly tended to be from Old English, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting. So you wrote this beautiful book, Why Q Needs You. Maybe you can just briefly share the story of why Q does need you.
Oh, dear. Yes, when I came up with that title, I really should have anticipated this question. Do you know what? I'm so pleased that you asked this later on in our conversation because we have a lot of the ingredients that we already need to understand this. Q is one of these cases of redundancy where letters are being passed on from language to language and they are no longer needed, but they are maybe surviving for different purposes. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Once upon a time, Q has a distinct letter. It's absolutely pulling its weight. It's one of the original members of the alphabet. Pictographically, it was most likely a monkey or a baboon originally, so a hieroglyphic baboon. And it's the capital Q still has a little bit of that. The circle is its body and the tail is there as well. So that's nice. And in the ancient Semitic language, that is the context for the alphabet, it's standing for a sound that I can't really replicate. It's kind of like a k with some extra stuff in the throat going on. It's a kind of glottalized k sound. It's passed on to the Greeks, the letter, and the Greeks just don't have this sound. So the Greeks say, well, thanks very much. We love your new system. We don't want to change it too much because it's cool and prestigious. So we'll keep Q. They call it copper, but we don't really need it. We've got kappa, K, which is performing the same function, the k sound. And what we see in ancient Greek is actually copper vanishes. It disappears slowly from dialect to dialect and it's not there anymore. But it lingers long enough in ancient Greece to make the journey to Italy, that crucial journey where the Greeks pass on the alphabet to the ancient peoples of Iron Age Italy. And Q is there. It's there for the Etruscans. It's there for the early Romans. And it could have gone the same way as K for the Romans. It could have been purged from their brand new standard Roman alphabets. But crucially, there's a slight audible difference. The Romans think of k and qu as two separate sounds rather than one sound and a sequence of two sounds, as we might think of like qu in English, queen and quick and equivalent, stuff like that. The Romans think of qu as a distinct sound of Latin. So therefore, it can have its own spelling. And the way that they spell this is to keep QU. That is the only way in which Q is able to endure in their new system, in their new version of the alphabet. It can't stand on its own because it'll be pointless because they have C for the K function on its own. Q has been partnered up with U for a long time, and now it depends on U. U saves its life. It saves it from being thrown into the dustbin, whatever the Romans have. And that's the reason why Q needs U. It needs U. It's the only way that it survived that purge of letters, or say purge, it's kind of a reduction of redundant letters. And we can do without it. Some languages that use the Latin alphabet don't have it. Old English doesn't have it. It was just CW, which is very sensible. But because of the Norman Conquest, because everything has to be French and Romance and Latin-like after 1066, QU comes back and English has been stuck with it ever since. I would argue either get rid of it, spell it with CW or KW, or actually, this is something the Romans could have done and maybe should have done, and maybe were thinking about doing based on some fragments, get rid of the U so that Q on its own is standing for qu. So we would spell quite, Quite. That could work. But until we take that step, the Romans never did, but until we do, Q needs U.
Yeah, it's the only letter in our alphabet that can't function on its own. How fascinating. And I just have to thank you again for just making this information so accessible for the educators listening or anyone listening who is interested in this kind of work. And maybe we can wrap up with just a few rapid fire questions. This can be just a very brief one response unless you feel like you need to elaborate. But in your opinion, which letter has the most interesting history?
Oh, that's a good question. How can I respond? Do you know what? For me, it's A. It sounds
Yeah.
so boring, but I love the fact that you can see its ultimate origins, and it's just a great way for alphabetic history. It's A. I love the monkey of Q. I love that R, capital R, used to be a head once upon a time, a person's head. But no, I'll go with A.
How classic of you. And which letter has the most fascinating journey as it relates to pronunciation change?
I like that. There's a fascinating journey. I would say, for me personally, it would be something like O. I think O is really interesting for that, in that O is when it's set up, when it's originally used in the alphabet, it represents an I, the part of the body, and it stands for a consonant in Semitic languages, which is so alien from European languages. It's really barely found in European speech. And consequently, the Greeks say, well, we don't have that sound, so we'll turn it into an O as well. And you can watch the development of it from that point. O becomes a vowel. The Greeks get two letters out of O, two for the price of one. The original O becomes little o, omicron, little, and the big one, the long vowel, becomes omega, big O. So that's interesting. I love that ancient history. But as I mentioned previously, it is a window into the changing face of English, in that now Americans, Canadians are pronouncing a short O differently to how Brits, Australians, Kiwis, Indians, South Africans, Irish people are pronouncing it as well. So it's a great window into a lot of history.
Yeah. And then which letter entered our modern alphabet the latest?
It's between three. It's honestly quite difficult to say. The emergence of a new letter. How do you know when you have one? Because we all have different handwriting,
Yeah.
where letters look kind of different, but from these differences, new letters can emerge. It's J, U, V, or W. I would go out on a limb and say that it's probably W, because W is the last thing, it's kind of the last where it's really something distinctive being used, and you can really tell that they are doubling a U or a V. It's not clear to begin with when it emerges, hence why we say W in English, but W in French, right? It's probably W, that it's a distinct letter. The reason why I can't be clear on this is that J emerges out of I, and U and V separate from each other over the history of the Middle Ages and the early modern period. And that separation is really gradual. It's really, really gradual. So because of that, Samuel Johnson, in his famous dictionary bestseller in the day, 1755, he actually lists IJ and UV words together, because for him, the separation is not yet complete, even in the 18th century. Nonetheless, I'd go out on a limb. I think it's W.
Oh, so interesting. And I love that you just mentioned J, U, and V, because as you said that, I was thinking of an orthographic rule that words in English don't end in J, U, or V. If we have a word ending in the J sound, it's often spelled GE or DGE. If we have a V at the end of it, will be VE. It's just interesting to think about it that way. Maybe the conventions came because of its late history. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds and letters developing hand in hand.
Yeah. And you mentioned already K was one of our letters that disappeared from the alphabet. Were there any others that disappeared and made a reappearance?
Made a reappearance, it would be something like Q. As I mentioned, that does make a return to the English alphabet in these years. X as well is not really there in Old English, and it is there, but it increases massively in later stages of the language. Then there are many letters that have disappeared, and for the time being have not made a comeback. Something like thorn, which is used for th, and it's very useful. Why write th when you could write a single letter? But no, that hasn't made a reappearance. There's a few of them, and every time the alphabet changes hands, letters fall by the wayside. It's just a natural process.
I learned about thorn from Fiona's book, The High Frequency Word Project, with the word the, and how fascinating it is that it was spelled with a letter that we don't even have anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, is there one word in English that just makes you marvel at its history?
One word.
One word
you,
to rule them all.
you can't do that to me. A single word to rule them all.
As a linguist, I know. Pick
What
your
a thing.
favorite word.
See, I've been thinking about words for a long time, writing etymology posts and that sort of thing, and words that just continue to surprise me. What a good one. Honestly, I have a soft spot for the unsung heroes. I love the grammatical words. I love the functional words. Your fancy words that don't occur very often leave me a bit cold. They're like fancy flowers in a garden. What I want is the soil, the weeds. They're far more interesting, as any gardener can tell you. So it would be something like at and the definite articles and indefinite articles. I think they're fascinating, the way that we juggle the two. Do you know what? I have a lot of love for it. I really like it as a word because I won't go into this. I'll leave this for listeners maybe to follow their own analysis. It does not change. He becomes him. She becomes her. It has nothing. It is it. It is nice. I see it. What you might call nominative, accusative, or subjective, objective as its two functions. That pattern is ancient. That is absolute, like millennia ancient, in taking us into the earliest perceivable stages of English, when it's not even English, it's something else and something else and something else, millennia ago. So, you know what? Until I think of something else, it's going to be it.
I love it.
You love it? So do I.
I love it. I love it. And I think I'm going to have a repeat episode with you, maybe talking about syntax one day.
Oh, I need very little encouragement to talk about syntax.
Yeah. So if someone were to pick up your book, Why Q Needs You, what is your biggest hope that they would take away from either the alphabet or the English language in general?
Wow. The big one is, perhaps a big point as belief, is that it's not random. Is that it's just not random. So much has gone into it, and there's basically an explanation for everything. There are so many principles and rules and regularities that have gone on together. They combine, and it looks like irregularity, but it's not. It's competing regularities. So that's the fact. The principle or the attitude that I would love it if people came away is actually not to do with the book and not to do what's in the book, but actually what's outside of the book, which is speech, and to listen to speech, to keep your eyes open and to think about that the way that you are speaking, the way that you do this thing and the way that you hear it and what other people are doing, to make people, not in a bad way, conscious of speech. And this is a constant piece of feedback from the book, where I have people like mouthing out the words on the page. And that is, for me, an accolade. That's a knighthood, that I've got people who've never thought about these things before grappling with speech and its relationship to writing, because that's the start of a big adventure. And if my book can be the spark that sets this whole thing off, then I'll be very proud indeed.
Yeah. And many of my listeners are teachers. And so for that particular audience, what do you hope that they take away, and maybe even assisting their students in tackling some of the features that we see in English spelling? And I love how you said it's not full of irregularities. It's full of this complex information. And sometimes we just need the explanations or the language to deal with it when it comes up.
Absolutely. Yes. What would I say to the teachers listening? Firstly, I salute you. That's the first thing I say. I am in awe of anybody who is a teacher at any level, to basically combine educating, acting on a stage. You're a parent, you're a therapist, you're everything to these young minds. So I salute them first and foremost. Beyond that, I don't know if this needs to be said for everybody, but there is an answer. So in the past, a lot of people in a teacher position, doesn't have to be teachers, could be parents as well, have just said, it just is that way. Accept it. Shut up, basically. And with linguistics, especially, and with so many fields, but linguistics, the answers are there and they're becoming more and more accessible. So I would hope that the next time a teacher is confronted with a really good, really difficult question about the way that English is spelt, if you've read my book, you don't have to remember everything, but I would hope that the default response is, there is an answer. Let's go find it out together. And if I haven't written about it in the book, then, I don't know, send me a message or send a linguist a message. We're really friendly people. We love talking about this stuff. So just keep us in mind. We'll help you out and allow you to come up with an answer.
Yeah. And what a gift to have all of this unique information and rich history all in one place. You don't have to Google it. You don't have to wonder if it's historically accurate. And like I said, it's presented in such a beautiful, charming manner. So I truly hope if this information or this conversation sparked some curiosity for those listening, you do pick up a copy. And the audiobook is wonderful as well. Like I said, it's really lovely to hear your words being spoken in such a delightful and an enthusiastic way to bring this work all to life. So I appreciate all of the knowledge and wisdom and your life's work for sharing all of this with podcast listeners today. And for those who are equally enthralled and enticed by your information, where can they connect with you further? And perhaps you can even share the name of your podcast where they can listen some linguistic lit bits.
Yeah, I mean, if your lovely listeners haven't heard enough of my voice already, you might want a cool off period first. Yes, so I'm not hard to find online. I've made a home on various platforms over the years. I'm on social media, Twitter, Blue Sky, not really present so much on YouTube, even though I would really love to get into videos. It's a kind of personal Rubicon. But first and foremost, my website, dannybate.com. I write monthly or bi-monthly articles there, and always intended to with the same mixture of facts and humor. And the podcast is A Language I Love Is, where I interview experts about one particular language and get them to share their enthusiasm for it and introduce it in, I hope, an accessible way. So that's me. I live in language. It's what I do, and I'm very fortunate to do so.
Wonderful, wonderful. And maybe for the teachers listening, if you can infuse some of this knowledge to your students when it's applicable, it may just spark a little Danny to go down the path into linguistics one day. So how exciting. Thanks again for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle.
Of course. Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.